Okay, here we go again. Mostly hairless apes. Welcome back. Dr. Gene Mesco here. Another suggestion from the Bioble, the holy book of the evolving church of science. That's what we're getting into. I realized the evolving church of science can only have suggestions. It really can't have commandments. I grew up Roman Catholic with commandments, but we're getting past that whole religion thing. We're using a different belief system. In the new world order, we're going to use science. Just as long as it works, and that's why it's the evolving church of science. We know something's going to evolve, it's going to change, but it's a church because it's a belief system. We believe in reality, and our shared reality is the best reference to make decisions. That's what science agrees on. That's what rational, logical, reasonable, sane people do. And it's time to get over all the God bullshit. Sorry. That's where we are historically. Right now, if you track back if you could track to the source, I would bet good money, 9 out of 10 times, probably more, you're going to get back to somebody's belief system. And you're going to say, well, why do you think we should do it that way? Ultimately, they're going to give you some explanation that's going to involve the deity because that's just how it is. That's what I believe, they'll say. And that's okay. We all have to believe in something because nobody has absolute knowledge. And we all have to operate with some belief. But in the evolving church of science, what the Bioble teaches us is that we should act on as much knowledge, as much shared, referenced, researched, peer-reviewed, investigated, evidentiary, empirical evidence, and use that information, stuff that's been proven, common sense, if you will, but not that it's so common that it hasn't been verified, and operate from those things. And anything that somebody says, God told me, we have to go, that's very nice. And we get them a juice box and a cheese stick, and we let them go sit at the children's table. Because that's it, I'm over it. And if you're going to celebrate diversity, we should celebrate diversity for a good reason. Because ultimately, civilization boils down to trust. That's why we evolved belief systems in the first place. And when we all grow up with family, whoever they're, and you trust them to whatever extent you trust family. But the idea of trusting them is implicit by evidence. And you trust the people you know because you've got evidence from your personal experience. You've lived with them your whole life, they're family members, and they've behaved a certain way. And you're fairly confident they're going to behave the same way. And that decreases with the degree of exposure you have to that person. The more you know them, the more you trust them. Or at least trust them to behave in a consistent pattern, because that's all you've ever seen them do. But if you don't know people, you don't know how they're going to behave. You can assume certain things, that they're human, they're going to be hungry and tired and whatever, that they're going to be a part of the same species, and that's what the Bioble teaches us. We can work with other people because they're human and they're going to have at least some basic similar interests. And if we can work out deals for economy or economic exchanges, then we can all agree. But then should we kill them when we're done or whatever has to happen? Because that's civilization. The rules we have about working with each other and how we decide to share resources. It's easy with family and friends, but how do we do it with everybody else? And that's what the Bible is suggesting rules for. Because if we build it on science, if we say, oh, we're evolving social primates, going through the process of artificial selection, we use our consciousness to make decisions. We have whatever information we have, some combination of knowledge and belief. As we have knowledge and belief, and we have knowledge that's verified, that we accept as true, we all have our own beliefs. But I want to share beliefs. So if I want to trust somebody, I want to think that they want them to tell me that they have the same beliefs. And that's why gods have been such a great adaptation. Gods have been a beautiful adaptation for humanity because we said, well, this God says this. Do you accept this God as your personal God? And if you say yes, you can go, oh, okay, we agree to all these rules from this God. And the rules have changed over the years, just like the gods have changed. Obviously, a couple of them have been around for quite a while. Jesus and Allah have been here over 1,000 years. Buddha, a variety of deity-like figures. I'm not sure about Buddha, but I don't know how much divinity they claim for him. Uh, but, Catholics, we had all these other, we have all the saints, we have all these people who go up, and we have an afterlife. That, if you have to get down into the details, that was the big one that probably sold Christianity and Islam. As Islam carried it on, Christianity came up with the whole afterlife thing and really worked that into a great storyline. Because then they borrowed from Mithra and a whole bunch of other deities around 2,000 years ago. You can track that back. There were plenty of rising from the dead zombie gods like Jesus who said, okay, but if you listen to the rules, you're going to have a really great time when you're dead. Which is a beautiful lie, because they don't know. Nobody knows. It's a belief. And a belief that you don't believe is a lie, as far as you're concerned, because it's something that somebody else thinks is true, but you disagree. You think it's not true. That's why but you can't disprove it. You just don't think it's real. And subsequently, we have to put up with other people's beliefs. We have to celebrate that diversity because we all have different beliefs. But if we could minimize those beliefs, and one of the only beliefs that the evolving Church of Science requires is to say, you know what? There might not be any gods. I can't prove that there's not any gods, just like you can't prove that there are gods. We think there are gods out there. If you think there are gods out there, there are personal entities that are some different life form, some different form of energy and matter arranged in space and time, that they can actually listen to us and intervene in our behalf when we pray to them. That's a really nice story. But there's no evidence that would stand up in a court of law, that would stand up to scientific peer review. And so it's bullshit as far as a lot of people are concerned, and I'm one of them. I think gods have outlived their usefulness as an artificial adaptation in the evolving Church of Science. And in the evolving Church of Science, we say, well, we have all this other evidence. We have this knowledge stuff. Nobody's ever seen an electron, but we believe an electron is some sort of subatomic particle, and we know it has certain properties. We put it into all sorts of magnetic fields and electronic fields, and we expose it to different things, and it behaves consistently enough that we can build the amazing electronic technology that undergirds our civilization, that allows us to have a global communication network, that allows us to fly spacecrafts and satellites around the planet and navigate the oceans and the lands with GPS systems and talk to each other. We don't know what an electron is, but we got a description. We've got some basics. And that's the whole point with the evolving Church of Science. We don't think the God stuff is very useful anymore, other than to show the way to the fact that we do need a belief system. Because that's the problem. As much knowledge as I might have, if you don't accept reality, if you're not sane enough to accept reality as a definition of everything, how am I supposed to trust you? How am I supposed to respect you as a fellow adult, mature, professional human? If you're going to tell me, and also I believe in this magical deity who died on the cross 50,000 years ago, or ascended into heaven, or can turn water into wine, or whatever other magic stuff the gods have done through the ages. I mean, we've refined our gods. We've had so many different gods. I mean, you go back to hunter-gatherer gods, and you get personal gods. They're just god of the hunt, and do different things. They were just personal for the tribes. But as we evolved bigger and bigger societies, bigger civilizations, we needed ways to control people, to say, how do we get everybody on the same page? How do we trust everybody? We all have to follow the same leader. But why should I follow this leader? Well, because he's been ordained by the deity. By this God said, this guy is the man. He's the one to follow. And it's usually been a man. And because we've accepted that we need to know the art of war as part of one of our civilization skills. Everybody should know Everybody should be a first responder. Everybody should be able to handle a gun. Everybody should understand how to use a rifle platoon to set up an ambush, how to defend a hill. Basic infantry skills would be a good thing for everybody to know, because society might degrade to that point. That civilization might degrade. It has in the past. And if we start a shooting war, you want to be on the winning side. So we have to acknowledge that the natural selection pressures, life and death, are reality. And sometimes people resort to that. Now, in the modern world, we think it's a stupid idea in the evolving Church of Science because we're just pissing away resources. And the whole thing in Ukraine right now, oh my God, how many billions of dollars are being wasted blowing up tanks and missiles and drones and planes and pipelines, and not to mention the human cost. And this is just stupidity. When a scientist looks at something like modern warfare, all you can think is, what are you guys arguing about? What is the point of this? Why are you killing each other, wasting all this energy? So somebody can extract money. That's the real problem. See, so now you got to go through the whole package here to really appreciate how stupid this is. Because what have we evolved? We have selectively bonded for bigger and bigger groups. About 100 years ago, there were only about 40, 50 nations. That's where we'd gotten to. And most of it was based on colonialism, because the whole point was we could go take over your lands. And the places that were independent, a lot of them were just isolated enough that they didn't bother. The other ones were all under the thumb of the British Empire or the Japanese Empire or the French Empire. And then about 200 years ago, we broke away. The U.S. broke away. And we said, wait a minute, what about democracy? What about democracy? What if we let the people decide as opposed to the rulers? But America got fat and lazy. Because what happened once we had the Industrial Revolution, so the democracy broke away, and everybody said, because wealth 200 years ago was primarily biological and geographic. You owned land, you lived in a place with enough resources to support your population, or you didn't, and you had to trade. That's why the Arabs were nomads for years, because it's really hard to live in the desert and grow things, and you didn't have that many people there. But now they discovered oil that fuels the Industrial Revolution. That's why they've become powerful geopolitical forces. But 200 years ago, the height of the colonial era, we ruled places because you showed up with guns, and you said, "Oh, we're going to trade. You guys want to trade, right? And you guys are going to sell us this stuff at whatever prices we determine, because we have this different money than you do, and we'll pay you something for it." And it was, oddly enough, it usually came out into the colonial masters' benefit on those trades. And that worked really well for England and France and Germany and Japan and all those imperial powers. But until we said, no, we don't want to do it anymore. And we broke away at that point from the monarchies. And then on top of that, then it was ongoing, it was building up, but the Industrial Revolution really kicked in. And we went and we escalated the technology that we had to control things, to kill each other, to communicate, to travel. All of those things, to make things, all of that exploded in the 1800s. And a bunch of people started breaking away. So we hit the 1900s, we hit the 20th century, and we had world wars. We had this huge argument as a species as to who should run the planet. And a bunch of countries broke away. We went from having about 50 countries in the League of Nations to the current about 200 countries, where most of them are old colonies, a lot of small little island nations. And everybody wants to control their own fate. Everybody likes the idea of government of, by, and for the people, not for the rich aristocrats. But the aristocrats didn't like that. We've always had aristocrats. We've always had leaders trying to decide what society should do. But a leader's just a subset of the aristocracy. I mean, as soon as you become a leader, you're technically part of the aristocracy, I think, because you're known by people and you're going to get some sort of benefits from being the leader. We acknowledge that if you're going to lead, there are burdens to leadership, and you should get some compensation for that. That's perfectly reasonable. But How much compensation? That's where it becomes a matter of degree. We all acknowledge there should be some different pay scales. Nobody likes communism in the sense of the lie that it is. We are not nearly mature enough as a species to allocate, or rich enough to say everybody can have everything they want. But because that's what happens with leadership. You get power, and power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, I believe, is the quote from Machiavelli. And so you always want to limit power. That was the big thing with the U.S., separation of powers. But as the world's gotten busier and more crowded, and we've had leaders step up who've accumulated resources and have said, oh, we should do it this way, or we should do it that way, and we should take out those people, and we don't like these people. And that's where we need to stop. That's why today's talk is celebrate diversity. We need to embrace the fact that there's 8 billion of us. And what we should be trying to do, excuse me. What we should be trying to do is maximize life, maximize probabilities in our favor. We should work on these things. And what should we work on? We should work on thinking about how to get the most out of every human that we can in terms of contributing to the success of the species. That's what biology teaches us. That's what the Bioble teaches us. It says, well, what is life? Life is a transitory thing. It's this magical thing that where biochemicals in reverberating circuits that have the ability to maintain themselves within cellular membranes, evolved into multicellular organisms which have their own homeostasis through a variety of behaviors and endocrine systems and nervous systems for animals, pheromones and all sorts of fun signals to control this, until consciousness evolved. Eventually, somewhere in the last few million years probably, we evolved consciousness. Our ancestors said, wow, I can think about stuff. I can communicate. I can make deals. And we all agreed that was a good thing, because obviously we've used it to take over the planet. But how did you communicate beyond your group? Because when we first did it, and it took us thousands of years to work this out, was we just had to work out the group dynamics. And we all trusted our groups. But at some point, probably when we started doing agriculture, we started building much bigger groups. We were able to support much bigger groups. We had the resources. We were able to grow more food. And then you could start specializing. And Charlie could just make pots, and Anna could just make sweaters. Whatever stuff you could do, whatever skill set you had, Gina could make wine. Whatever it was, people had special, and that's a good thing. So then we started building economies. We could trade all this specialized stuff we could do because we had more resources, because we were growing more food, and we were doing agriculture as opposed to hunting and gathering. And we started building bigger civilizations. And what did we do? We said, oh, this is really great. We should have more of this. We should have markets. We should trade this. We'll get money lenders eventually. Eventually, we invented money about 5,000 years ago. That's the first coins that I know of. But we figured all this stuff out. We have an economy, and we have rules, and we run our social systems. And when we share a belief, then we have a civilization. Because now we agree on an idea. That's what makes a civilization. Civilization is saying we agree that this set of ideas is true. We don't have any proof, but because we think these things are true or good, we're going to follow a certain set of rules based on those ideas. And for thousands of years, when people got into arguments about that, the thing everybody fell back to was the classic definition, no different than what mom and dad did when we were all little. Because I said so. And if it's not the priest saying that, they say God said that. That's what the priests all say, and it worked, because most of the ideas are pretty good ideas. Let's not kill each other. Don't take anybody's stuff. Don't steal anything. Hey, every once in a while you should actually calm down and take a break. Maybe think about something. Maybe rest on the Sabbath. Those are all really great civilized ideas, but they're all dependent on the first rules. If you know the 10 Commandments in Christianity, the first rules are all about belief in God. You got to accept God. There's only one true God. And that's the starting point. You all got to agree on something. But why does it have to be a God? Why can't we all agree that we're evolving social primates on a planet governed by certain rules of physics and chemistry and biology? We deal with the chemistry and physics, but the biology rules they don't want to work with because the evolution contradicts the God. And the power systems have all been vested in having people believe in gods for so long that it's really hard to change. But like I said, this is about celebrating diversity. And science is a relatively young idea. I mean, we've figured stuff out. People have been making tools for years. Go back to Homo habilis, 3 million years ago, going towards Homo erectus. And the Ashul tools from South Africa, the Ashulian tools, the flint knapping, making hand axes. We've been doing this for millions of years. We figured out fire, how to cultivate, how to grow, how to make fire, how to maintain fire. So we've been doing science by trial and error for millennia, for millions of years. And then it's just exploded with the Industrial Revolution. We've been able to put rules on all these scientific things. We figured out a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things we figured out, oddly enough, during the Industrial Revolution was this whole idea of evolution. What is the pattern of change? How do things change? And Darwin gave us natural selection, and then humans gave us we realized what we're doing is artificial selection. It all works if you treat it all as information. Natural selection works on natural information, on the laws of physics and chemistry, and biology builds on that. Biology manipulates physics and chemistry to capture energy in molecules. That's what living systems do. That's how we stay alive. We've become these dynamic systems with our own internal directions. We've been able to capture information, initially in DNA. That's why the DNA revolution is so big, because running DNA through all of this stuff is about processing information for natural selection. That's the process of natural selection evolution. DNA changes as it's stored inside of an organism, and it gets copied and transmitted into offspring. And as the information changes in DNA, as mutations occur, and we change the sequence of nucleotides in DNA molecules, they change the information. And is that a good change or a bad change or a neutral change? That's the easy math. Plus, minus, or zero. Most changes, and it turns out when we look at DNA, most changes are zeros. We got enough redundancy in the information that a change often doesn't have any effect at all. And we can use that as a clock. And that's why we can use DNA to measure things, because there's a standard rate of change, a mutation rate. But every once in a while, one of those mutations makes things dysfunctional. Well, from a long-term history perspective, we don't have to worry about those because they disappear. If you create a horrible mutation that causes things not to work in your body, you're going to die. You're probably not going to reproduce. So your DNA is going to die with you. It's going to be degraded back to atoms and recycled through the ecosystem. But if you stay alive, you get to pass it on to offspring. And if it's useful, if you actually gave you an edge, then survival of the fittest. That's natural selection in a nutshell. And that's been going on for billions of years, going from cells to multicellular organisms, to animals and plants, to vertebrates, to mammals, to primates, to hominids, and leading eventually to us. And the tool we use, as opposed to big teeth and claws like a cat or a bear, the carnivores, we're the primates. We got opposable thumbs and bigger brains. And when you look at human evolution, brains are the big thing we've changed. That's our big adaptation, hands and brains. Hands allow us to manipulate the environment. Brains allow us to process information and make decisions. That's what consciousness gave us. And then we could start doing artificial selection. That's a whole layer of information over and above natural selection. Natural selection is limited by chemistry and physics. There's a reason ATP is the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria making ATP. We found a common energy currency that we could use like a battery pack for 9 out of 10 reactions in the body, probably 99 out of 100. And ATP is this little chemical molecule, but it's limited. It only has 7.3 kilocalories per joules per mole. It has a limited amount of energy available. And so you can only do so much work with it. And that's the essence of metabolism and homeostasis. You have to break things down into processes and coordinate them. And that's what's built up through natural selection through billions of years, is all these metabolic functions. And we can do glycolysis and transcription and translation of DNA and protein synthesis with modifications. And we can do beta oxidation of lipids. All these fun biochemical reactions that keep us alive. They allow us to organize molecules and energy over time and space and staying alive. And the organisms, what works gets passed on and sticks around. But then once we figured out consciousness, we realized we could make up all these rules. We can make stuff up. We can imagine things. That is so cool. Now, if you imagine it enough and it turns into reality, that's really great. But when you imagine something that you don't have any proof for, like a god, you can still use it until somebody calls bullshit on you. And that's what I'm doing right now. I am calling bullshit on all the religions in the world. And because here's what I think should happen. I think we should all say, I get it. There might not be a God. And that should be the new criteria for anybody who wants to call themselves a mature adult, a professional, anything. If you're going to say, well, I can do this work, but I can't do that because God says this. My God says this. I'm going to call bullshit on you. I don't care what your God says. Because we're done with gods. We are done with gods. Gods cause us to do things without reason. They tell you just have to trust. You just have to trust them. Well, I prefer to trust the science. And we've done a lot of science now on behavior, and we understand why people like gods. It's nice to have an authority take charge. It's good to have somebody organize things. That's what we've done for years. That's celebrate diversity. We realized having people specialize was a way better way to run our civilizations, because it takes time to make good clothes, good weapons, good furniture, good homes. And if I can have somebody specialize in that and just do that, I can do other things. I can do what I like to do. And that's that. So there's a more perfect union. An economy which allows everyone to develop to their maximum potential. I mean, we all grow up liking different things. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. Some people are better at navigating space. Some people get lost in a park. Some people get lost in the mall. And so depending on what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, some people can sing better than others. We can all do different things. And we structure our economy around those skill sets. And we decide what we want. And that's what we've done that. We've built up hundreds of professions over the years. Maybe you could divide them into subsets of professions, probably not that many. You talk about manufacturing professions versus thinking and medical professions, whatever it is. We've got a whole bunch of specialized jobs that earn people money, that allow us to trade in the economy, and they make us functional. But the leaders, the aristocrats, have been in charge for years because somebody had to organize stuff. I get it. We got to have leaders. But does it have to be permanent? Do they have to have absolute power? Can they be kings? Can they be priests, popes, whatever? That's what we used ultimately to organize systems. But when America broke away and said, wait a minute, government of, by, and for the people, that means we all have to step up. And that worked for while we filled up the continent. That worked for almost 200 years until we had to go in and deal with the collapse of the old order. So there was a small collapse of all those monarchies and religions in the 20th century. That's what World War I and World War II and the Cold War were all about. We got rid of the monarchs. We converted to democracy. The colonies got free. And then we had this big Cold War. We had this big argument about, well, how do we run the systems? How do we build our civilization? And we had these atheist communists, and we had these Christian capitalists. opposing each other. Because that's what it boiled down to. That's what sorted out into the 50s. That's when the U.S. decided to change our motto from E pluribus unum to In God We Trust. That was the telling point right there. That was a huge artificial selection node in the 1950s. Think about that. Think about our motto before that was E pluribus unum, from many one. That's celebrating diversity. That's saying, hey, we're all different. And because we're all different, we can still be a unified people because we all agree everybody should have their own space. Everybody should be able to go their own way. And we were able to do that because we had taken over the last big landmass. Europeans showed up 500 years ago in the Americas. They started transmitting their diseases. We wiped out 90% of the Native American population with diseases, shot a bunch of them to get out of the way. And the stragglers that were left just got pushed west until they were able to be confined on little plots of land, little Indian reservations. And we got those people there. We got them out of the way, and we took over. And we made everybody got to be king of their own castle until so many people showed up. And the leadership said, well, we don't want to give up any of this ownership stuff. We want to hold on to all the land we've got. And so now we started running back into the aristocracy problem. Because the economy got so big and the globe got so crowded that we started running into each other again. And so the only reason America, not the only reason, but the primary reason America was successful, in my opinion, is because we had the room for it. We could all be independent. We could all be many and then come together as one. And we came together in World War I and World War II to deal with the crash of empires. We said, we're not going to have dictators. We're not going to have Hitlers. We're not going to have Stalins. But then we ran into the nukes. And the military skills escalated. In 1945, we unleashed nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And we entered the atomic age. And now in the atomic age, you had weapons of mass destruction that it didn't matter how well we got together, how well we fought our infantry, how well we built our tanks. What mattered was, could I shoot a missile at you from 1,000 miles away? And there's nothing you can do about it. That was mutually assured destruction. That's what I grew up under. And people said, well, we got to make a choice then. How do we make a choice to avoid this? Well, we got to stop fighting. And so the Cold War devolved into little skirmishes where we used puppets instead of attacking each other. We killed all the old colony, and we fought around the world in all these different places. And we've hit a point now where we're still doing it. And we're doing it now for market share, and the rich people are telling us, oh, we should do this. Well, what if we just said stop? What if we just said, wait a minute, you know what? Maybe the problem is that we got too many leaders again. Maybe we have too many rich people. And I'm not saying eat the rich. They probably taste bad. But I'm just saying we have to limit social power so that democracy can work. Democracy can't work when you have a few people with lots of resources controlling the media, deciding what crap we're going to see on TV, what kind of things are going to get published and put out there, what kind of information is going to be available. And if we had free information and we said, well, let's share resources. Let's set up an economy that's reciprocal, that if you're willing to work and you do something decent, if you do something, even if it's just manual labor, you can make a respectable living. And because you have that respectable living, you'll have a chance to reproduce, to have at least 1 or 2 children. You'll have access to education, and your kids will have access to education. You'll have access to health care if you need it. And you'll have a retirement. That's the civilization I think we should be building. That's what science tells us. That's what the Bioble tells us. The Bioble tells us that we can build a global civilization where we distributed enough resources that we could all travel, we could all have medical care, we could all have education, and we could all have a home of our own. That's all. And then we'll see what happens next. Because once we have that, once we stop killing each other, Once we stop fighting over lands and fighting to get excess resources and squeezing the last dollar out of every poor working stiff, and they've screwed us so bad. We got rid of unions. We had this whole democracy with capitalism thing, where we had unions. We had people doing that. But the leaders said, "No, we don't like unions. You should be on your own." They don't want the people to. But that's the only way people with fewer resources can deal with people with more resources. If they have more resources and they can buy better weapons and hire more people, then I need to organize more people on the other end to deal with them, to deal with that conflict. Unless we can agree on something. And that's the problem. We don't agree on stuff because we don't celebrate diversity. We don't accept different ideas. The people who have power like it the way it is. The people who don't have power don't like it, but they don't know how to get organized. And that's what the Evolving Church of Science is about. Getting organized to be able to say, hey, here's what we should be doing. We should be taking care of each other. We should be celebrating diversity. We should be trying to keep as many species as alive. I don't even want to talk about the extinction events that we're dealing with right now, much less climate change. These problems are going to hit home, and the rich people don't give a shit. Why do you think Russia's selling so much oil? They don't give a shit. They love the idea of the ice caps melting. They're going to have a whole lot more coastline, and they will no longer be the poor relative in Europe because they'll be able to do trade, which is one of the reasons the U.S. is so rich. We've got a glacier-cut coast with lots of marvelous natural deep-water ports, the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay and New York Harbor and Boston Harbor. All of those natural ports, which are left over from the last glaciers 12,000 years ago, left us with better resources. The whole Mississippi Valley. Oh my gosh. 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. France and Britain are fighting, and France says, fuck you to Britain. We're going to give this huge amount of resources, which we don't have the resources to control, because we're in the middle of revolutions with Napoleon, and they sold it to us, and it was a big FU to the British. They said, you guys take this. This is going to make America really wealthy, and it has. I can't imagine what the Midwest would be worth. And think about all the real estate that came in with the Louisiana Purchase. Everything from the Dakotas to Texas, along the Mississippi River, all the way out to the Rockies. We said, all right, that's our land now. And we've farmed it and drilled in it and made billions of dollars in wealth off of it. And that's allowed us to climb to the top of the heap and become one of the richest nation in history. But then we fucked up. Because what happened in 1945 at the start of the atomic age? We built nukes, and we used them to say, all right, this is it. This big conventional World War stuff with battleships and planes and going all over the place, we're not going to do this anymore because we can nuke each other out of existence. And we started fighting all the little Cold War battles. We had spies, and we did all that crap. But what we didn't do is realize that we should shift gears back to democracy. Because we were the biggest guys left standing in the West, people who had money and resources decided to become more powerful. Eisenhower warned us about it, the military-industrial complex. And they said, what are you guys doing? We're going to build up power. We're going to control the markets. And that worked for about a 20, 30-year run. That's just the historical anomaly that Thomas Piketty described in the wealth. We're talking about wealth, is that period of having middle-class citizens is an illusion. It's a historical anomaly in modern times. You go back 200 years and you look at all the tax records, and there's basically been less than 10% of people with lots of money and 90+% of the people with minimal money. And that's how it's been for recorded history, as far as we can tell. But we had this middle class. We started saying, wait a minute, we can have these people who help manage this complex society, and these middle managers. And we started to grow that. But what happened with that is that not enough money was going to the aristocrats, to the top people at the top. So in the 70s and 80s, they started killing us. They started saying, take away unions, arguing about health care. All this stuff that the New Deal provided, they didn't like all that because it meant more taxes, and they wanted more money. The bastards at the top were greedy, and anybody would be greedy. They just happened to be the ones who were there. And if you or I were to do it, if you don't consider yourself one of the aristocratic elite, put yourself in their shoes. Because if we were in their shoes, we would probably behave the same way. We're all human. But we're all human with differences. Yeah, and there's going to be subtle little differences. That's the beauty of diversity. We don't know what the differences are, but we won't know how they will achieve their potential unless we make a more equitable society. How do we make a more equitable society? We structure it so everybody has those basic opportunities to develop. And the only requirement is that you work. You go out there and you contribute somehow. You make a product. You provide a service. The capitalism works, but it works best with democracy if democracy is in charge. See, what we have right now is democratic capitalism. Supposedly, we can vote on things and we have lawmakers, and that's obviously going away because capitalism is winning out. What we need is capitalist democracy. We have a democracy and we make a rule that says, you got to work. Everybody needs to work to the best of their capacity. And because then we acknowledge the biological realities, which is why we need to move away from individuals and talk about groups. Because in reality, the core units are the family, the clan, the tribe, that group of a few hundred people that takes care of themselves, that raises the kids, takes care of the elderly. Some people go out and earn money in the economy, and they all support each other. And they do non-cash labor. Who's washing the dishes? Who's running the vacuum? Who's cleaning? Who's doing the laundry? All of that stuff needs to get done to have a happy life. But it's hard to do it all yourself. You either farm it out, provide services, if you're rich enough, or you take care of it at home by maintaining a functional social unit, a micro-civilization, a grand falloon, whatever we want to call it. But it should be people who get together and take care of each other. That's all we can do for civilizations. And so we rebuild it from the ground up. That's the call of the Bioble. Celebrate that diversity. Enjoy the fact that some of us there's 2 to 3% of us are going to be born with congenital defects. There's always going to be a weird mutation. DNA is still there. Natural selection's still there. And it doesn't always get it right. We've all got all sorts of diseases. And we're getting rid of them slowly, but that takes more scientists doing more research, applying it through medical technology and taking care of each other. And we could do that if we stop pissing away money on all the crap that we put money into and all this military shit. We should say, no, we should have a global police force. Yeah, on some level. We should have local police forces. We should have local police forces only get together with other local police forces to deal with bigger threats. And once we all have local police forces, once we're all operating in our own social units, once we're all taking care of our own, we would have the beautiful responsibility of deciding whether or not we thought our genetic contribution to the species was worth maintaining. Because that's what the Bioble tells us is real value. The only real value you have to the species is your genetic makeup over the long term, and obviously what ideas you can generate, what information, what mental information and what genetic information you can pass forward. Genetic information, obviously we can argue about that one a lot. Who has better genes? We all have the same genes. That's a misnomer. We all have different alleles. That's something called the gene pool, is how many different forms of the genes, of the 25,000 or so genes that make up the human species that we all use. Which ones are defective? Which ones are exceptional? I don't know what the right mixes are. That's why crossbreeding is such a fun experiment. We should all, how much outbreeding, how much inbreeding. We've decided against inbreeding. We realize that's not a good idea. That outbreeding is usually better. But how do we arrange that? That's for each family to decide. Who you're even going to reproduce. Maybe you shouldn't reproduce. We probably all know people who shouldn't reproduce based on our opinions. But that should all be based on the family structure, on the tribe, on the clan, on the village, on the grand falloon, whatever the grouping is. A few hundred people, I think, is the optimal number, because that's all the people you can trust. And if everybody took care of each other within those groups, we wouldn't have anything to fight about. Well, we'd still fight about. That'll be fun down the road. But that's the thing. Once we reorganize society on that level and everybody's taking care of themselves, there'll be a lot less to fight about. So, figure it out. Enjoy each other. Try to celebrate diversity if you can. That's all I've got.